everybody knows. But you were not in that.
Yeah, I was Burlington County mostly, around the Ranco. All right,
I just wanted to introduce Steve Elliott. He's from the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. And we've worked together once before. And you know, all we hear about the Pinelands is how cumbersome it is to get any development done. Carver City is considered a Pinelands town, and it is difficult, and they have a lot of stormwater requirements and things like that. And the age of our structures always seems to be a problem and so forth, and all you hear is negative stuff. And nobody really concentrates on the value of the Pinelands and what actually, why it's designated, I guess it's an international reserve.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be nice to have a program where we could see some of the plants that grow there and talk about the good things about the Pinelands. So people are more educated about why there's all these regulations and so forth. So this is Steve Elliott. Help yourself.
All right, good morning, everybody. Like Lynette said, my name is Stephen Elliott. I'm the Director of Watershed Programs at Pinelands Preservation Alliance. So Pinelands Preservation Alliance, if you're not familiar, we are the nonprofit sort of environmental and community organization that makes sure that the Pinelands Commission is doing things the way they're supposed to do as far as implementing the comprehensive management plan, which is all those rules and regulations for protecting the Pinelands. What we're going to talk about today is sort of why the Pinelands is such a special place and why it should be protected. So we're going to highlight some of the flora and fauna. I do not consider myself an expert in any one of these individual areas. I'm more of a generalist. If anything, I'm attracted to the ecology portion, sort of the connections between all of these different things. But I would say I'm probably above average in birds, insects, and maybe some pineland plants. Just from, being self-taught and things like that. Most of my work is centered around the green stormwater infrastructure, which is why we're doing the rain barrel workshop. We're also hoping to do a project in Egg Harbor City to keep some of that runoff from going into Egg Harbor City Lake. We do these sorts of projects throughout the Pineland area, the region of South Jersey. We've also partnered with the Highlands Coalition up north to do projects around their lakes to try and keep some of that excess nutrients and fertilizer and things from creating harmful algal blooms, which you might have heard about, which makes the water unswimmable. It makes it somewhat dangerous for people to be around. Like I said, today we're going to kind of focus on some of the cool things about the Pinelands. Now, within an hour, it's probably hard to focus on any one individual topic. So like I said, we're going to start with sort of the ecology of the Pinelands and what makes it so special and unique. And then we'll kind of talk about some of those individual categories like mammals and birds and insects and fungi. What I hope to leave you with at the end is some tools to help if you're interested in creating habitat within your own property, as well as some tools that if you want to learn more about a specific thing, how to go about doing that. So there's a lot of different tools now on your phone. So if you have a smartphone and you're comfortable downloading apps, all these field guides here can be replaced by this thing in your pocket. So I want to show you some cool tools that also contribute to citizen science, and that we can get towards that to that at the end. When we're looking at the plants, we can kind of use it, and I can show you how that works. But like I said, we're the nonprofit that kind of acts as the watchdog, but we also do a lot of community activities. We have a regenerative farm on our property in Southampton. Like I said, we do the green stormwater infrastructure. We do a lot of education. If you've ever been out with Pinelands Adventures, they do kayaking and canoeing on the Batstow around Axion. We do a lot of different naturalist walks, bird walks, beaver ecology walks, things like that. We do a lot of school programming and things like that to try and show people how special the Pinelands is and why it's so important that we protect it. All right, so I'll get into it. Like I said, my name is Stephen Elliott again. That's a picture. I'm wearing the same shirt. So we did a bog garden. So at the Philadelphia Flower Show, they had a category for pocket bog gardens. So this is one of my prouder moments. We got second place. All of the plants that you see in there, we sort of recreated what you might see at the edge of a bog in the Pinelands. But all those are Pinelands natives. And it's sort of a snapshot in time. This would be like a late winter, early spring, what you might see. So there's some high bush blueberry in the back, which is just starting to sort of open up and bud. There's a lot of low bush blueberry that we were able to force to flower. There's some bearberry in there that was flowering. The one in the middle there you see is a pitcher plant. So we had those nice big ball buds going. It wasn't quite in bloom yet, but it was sort of that early spring where the buds were popping up and they just look like little spheres coming up, which is kind of cool. There's some cranberry and different mosses in there, but we were trying to show in the back left, you'll see the Atlantic white cedar. So we were trying to show sort of what you might see in and around an Atlantic white cedar bog. All right, but what we're gonna kind of cover today is some of the unique Pinelands features. What makes the Pinelands and why is it a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve? We'll go through some of that Pinelands ecology along with that, and then we'll go into some of the flora and fauna. I won't get into any super specifics unless anybody has questions and we can talk about certain things. But then, like I said, at the end, I'd like to kind of talk about living in the Pinelands and maybe have a conversation. And then different learning opportunities. So if you are interested in, let's say, botany or pineland plants, I can kind of put you in touch with some people that you might want to talk to, or there's some courses that you can take with New Jersey Conservation Foundation, where you can kind of learn a lot more about those specific types of things. Plants is one, but there are other opportunities as well. All right, so welcome to the Pinelands. You all live in the Pinelands town, so I don't really have to welcome you. But thank you for welcoming me today. All right, so the Pinelands are the largest surviving forest on the eastern seaboard. It's named for its pitch pine predominant forest, and we'll get into why the Pinelands have pitch pine dominant forest as opposed to some of the other trees that you often see out here. So why isn't it the Atlantic white cedar, lands or the oak lands or anything like that? We'll get into why the ecology and the natural systems that occur make it a Pinelands predominant forest. All right, it's home to the globally rare pygmy pine plains. Has anybody been there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My whole life.
So those are sort of around the Warren Grove recreational area. It's a great place to walk. Pretty cool. We have two rivers in the National Wild and Scenic River System. Anyone want to take a guess at one? No.
Not a grade A carbon?
It is great. Oh, I was gonna say you can't, that's cheating. You can't answer.
Oh, okay. I know another one that we might get.
The volume is not.
So the Mullica, there's some very, very preliminary discussions about trying to get it, but the two that are in there right now are the Great Lake Harbor and the Morris River, depending on, what's the one? Morris, if you say Maurice, you're.
That's further south though.
Yeah.
Yes, it's in that area.
Yeah, so it's Morris, but it's spelled like Maurice, but if you say Maurice.
You're not a pine. Well, it's like Deer Street. It's Dewar, but
Tiny.
if you say Dewar, you're not from here.
That's right.
Yeah, but the one depicted is the Mullica, because there, like I said, there are some preliminary discussions to try and work towards that. And so that's something that hopefully we will see in the near future. All right, so Atlantic white cedar swamps, I kind of talked about that with the bog garden, but these are very unique habitats. These are places where you'll find some of those very rare species of plants. But it also is a carbon sequester. It's a groundwater recharge area. They're very, very important ecosystems within the Pinelands. Now you will see, so you'll see these are generally very, very wet. There are some spots that for some reason are not, the hydrology has changed, whether it's beaver activity or human activity. And there's a lot of surviving sort of Atlantic white cedars in what's now drier areas, which would sort of look like an upland area. And they're still doing well. There's one in Marlton where it looks like human activity has sort of changed the hydrology, and some of the cedars are starting to kind of tip over, and it's kind of getting replaced by pine and other species of trees. But for the most part, when you see Atlantic white cedar swamps, it's a very wet area. You'll see sphagnum moss and other types of mosses. In the spring and summer, you'll probably see different perennials and orchids popping up. But very, very important habitat. If you're walking in the Pinelands and you're hot and you want to cool off, find Atlantic white cedar swamp. It's generally 10 to 20 degrees cooler when you're walking through that area than it will be if you're walking elsewhere in the Pinelands. All right, and so this is one of the main reasons why the Pinelands are so unique and why it's protected. There's an estimated 17 trillion gallons of water in the Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer. And so that's why it was a big reason why it was originally protected for agricultural needs, for residential needs. There's a lot of clean water under the surface. So if you're not aware of how the Kirkwood-Cohansey work, it's an unconfined aquifer. So basically it's a layer of coarse sand. The water seeps through that sand and hits a layer of clay. And so it's just kind of sitting there, and it will kind of fluctuate and move underground. All the lakes, the rivers, the ponds, as far as large scale ones, are mostly man-made. It's just where someone came along at some point and dug out an area and they hit the water table, and so it filled up, or they dammed up a stream or something like that. So there's not really any natural lakes or large ponds in the Pinelands. You will find areas, and I apologize, I forgot to bring the book. There's a geologist, Mark Dimitrov, some of you may be familiar with, but he wrote a book, Soggy Ground, and it describes some of those natural water features like the bogs, the spungs, and things like that. And it's a really thorough book if you're into geology and how this area was shaped by glacial movement and formerly being covered by seabed and things like that. All right, and just going into the water more, all that fresh water sustains our coastal estuaries, which are, very, very diverse and important ecosystems. And it's sort of a Noah's Ark for different species that have found ways to adapt to the unique ecology of the Pinelands. And we'll kind of get into that here in just a second. So we have 43 threatened and endangered animal species. So some of the animal species that are threatened and endangered here have actually been extirpated from other areas of the country and the East Coast. So the Pinelands is sort of the last stronghold for a couple of these. I think we get into it in a future slide which ones those are, but there's certain plants that used to be found along the eastern seaboard or the coast, and now they're just found in the Pinelands. Same thing with a couple of other creatures. And yeah, that's what I was saying. Some of the things that are found in the Pinelands, this is sort of the last refuge because the Pinelands were protected, but those other areas, say in other pine forests and down south, they weren't necessarily protected, or there just wasn't enough habitat, or for some reason there was poaching. But the Pinelands became that last refuge for some of these plants and animals. And here's three of them. So bog asphodel, is a fairly rare plant. I forget what, so they categorize, rare plants by like S1 to S5. I forget exactly which these are. It depends on how many occurrences, known occurrences there are. So if there's less than 5 occurrences where, scientists went out and they've only found this in 5 different spots, that's the highest level. So I think that's S1. And that's what you'll see if we are talking development and things like that, if there's some of those species that are S1 and things like that, that really there's nowhere else in the world that you might find it. There's only maybe 5 occurrences in the Pine Barrens itself, that's gonna create some problems for any sort of development in that area. They're really gonna try and protect those types of species.
Do you know what the, like buffer would be for something like that? Or
So
is it 300 feet?
I believe it is, I believe it's 300 feet, but don't quote me. I'd have to look that up. We had talked about Pickering's Morning Glory at one of, so I'm on the Rancocas Conservancy Board, and we have a property with Pickering's Morning Glory. And there's a lot of ATV and off-road vehicle activity there. And so when we were talking to the Park Service, they were talking about trying to shut down that whole area, but it's not really feasible with all the different old roads and things going in. But because Pickering Morning Glory, there are a lot more options. You can basically, if you need to, shut down that area, and fence it in if needed. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. All right, and like I said, so there's lots of recreation. I mentioned off-road vehicles. I'm not entirely opposed to off-road vehicles, but the way the off-road vehicles go out there and try and push the limit and go into wetlands and things like that, if they were just driving on old cranberry roads and things like that, that'd be one thing. But generally, they're buying these vehicles to try and get muddy and go into these areas where you're finding a lot of these rare and critical species. But at Pinelands Adventures, and just at PPA in general, we try and get people out for hiking, birding, sort of these passive recreation where it's not really doing damage, and we're leaving only footprints. And those are some of the reasons why it's been dubbed registered or certified, I don't know what you would call it, a UNESCO International Biosphere Reserve. So the Pinelands Commission a few months ago actually had some people from the UN come out and they did a tour of the Pinelands. So there are sort of perks to that, but there's also it brings attention on the Pinelands, and people want to come, which isn't a bad thing, but it's sort of a balance that we have to strike. All right, so I've thrown out both of these words, and they're sort of used interchangeably. But the Pinelands is what was decided by politicians, and that's what is shown in the green on this map. So when they were basically wheeling and dealing, when they were coming up with the idea for the Pinelands National Reserve and the Comprehensive Management Plan, they were drawing lines where they were going to sort of focus development. And they wanted to focus it on the outer perimeter of what's considered the Pine Barrens. So the Pine Barrens are what we're talking about when we're talking about those unique characteristics. So the sandy soil, the fire ecology, the low nutrients where you can't really grow traditional crops and things like that. We're talking about the ecosystem, the Pine Barrens. So you'll see that area, which is in sort of the pink and the orange and the purple, that area is much larger than the lines that were drawn by the politicians when they were wheeling and dealing, talking about development. So you will see Pinelands ecosystems outside of what's considered the Pinelands National Reserve. But that's the line they came up with when they were talking about these are the areas where we're going to allow certain development, either, lower density development, and then as you move outside the core of the pineland, like Wharton State Forest and Brendan T. Byrne, you can get that more dense development. All right, so here are the pine barrens characteristics generally. So you have a sandy soil, which is generally coarse, so it doesn't retain nutrients well. So even if you do add a bunch of fertilizer or you know, topsoil and things like that, eventually that's just gonna wash down into the ground. Because a lot of that stuff just passes right through that sand. The sand also doesn't because of its chemical characteristics, you know, topsoil will actually latch on to nitrogen and some of these other chemicals that plants need to grow well. Whereas in sand, that doesn't really happen. The sand doesn't really latch on and hold on to nitrogen or phosphorus, the things that plants need for food. So you have a very low nutrient level. Mark Dimitrov, I believe he refers to it as sediment depleted. So if we're comparing, let's say the non-tidal waters of a Pinelands River, you're not getting those rich sediments coming down from a mountain or like say the Mississippi River where it's collecting all this sediment from the whole basin and then it's sort of depositing it in the floodplain. So that's why you get these really rich soils around floodplains like the Mississippi or, you know, the Tigris and the Euphrates back when it was the Fertile Crescent. You had these flooding cycles where it would deposit nutrient-rich sediment onto the land. So that's why it would be so fertile. You also have plant adaptations, which we'll get into in a little bit. You have water, which we'll talk about the unique characteristics of the water, and then you have frequent fire. And we'll get into those all a little bit more in depth here. So like I said, we start with the sandy soil, there's high drainage, so water moves through it very quickly, and then it's low nutrients. It doesn't, phosphorus and nitrogen and things plants need don't latch onto that sand, but you're also not getting those flooding deposits that you would get out west or in Mississippi or anything like that, where it's coming down from mountains and other areas and depositing that sand onto the floodplain. If the Pinelands rivers flood, you're basically getting sand and clay and that sort of thing. Very low nutrient soils. But when we talk about barrens, we're generally referring to when European colonists came over, they said, we can't grow the things that we know how to grow. That's why it really got dubbed the Pine Barrens. But as we know, there are lots of things that do grow well in Pinelands. Blueberry, cranberry, huckleberry, bearberry, lots of different berries and other plants that are adapted to deal with acidic soil, acidic water, and low nutrient conditions. All right, and talking about the aquifer, so the sand generally deposited by when New Jersey was underwater and it was part of the Atlantic Ocean, you get a lot of sand deposits. And then when the glacial movement happens, you get sort of these different layers of sand and clay. And that's sort of what created those aquifers that are under New Jersey. But again, they're unconfined aquifers, so if, let's say, the base is using AFFF, which is a firefighting foam, if they're using that and they're spraying it across a nice wide swath of land, that is going to settle into the ground, and eventually as it continues to rain, things like that, it's going to spread. And so that's why up in Pemberton, there's a couple of lakes up there and a couple of areas up there that have been sort of identified by having a very, very high level of PFAS. So they have to do periodic well testing or they need to be put on city water. Some of the lakes are unsafe to sort of swim in or anything like that anymore. So that's an important thing to remember with the unconfined aquifer is that all that stuff can move around and sort of spread. And yeah, we already talked about this 17 trillion gallons of water, drinking water for lots and lots of people, as well as agriculture. All right, so the unique characteristics of the water is that it's generally acidic. So neutral water is at 7 on the pH. Just a recap of your high school chemistry. 7, and Pinelands water is generally 5 or lower. I've seen it doing water testing. I think there's one place where we were at like a 3.5, which is it's pretty acidic. It doesn't make it bad or unclean or anything like that. It's just more acidic. I think it's equivalent to in between tomato and orange juice on that scale. It obviously doesn't taste like that, but another unique characteristic of the Pinelands water is it's fairly brown, right? Anybody know where that comes from?
Cedars.
Yeah, the cedar, the tannins that sort of leach out of the cedars. Sorry, I usually do schools, so I ask a lot of questions.
Keep them awake.
All right, yeah, so cedar water, so it's generally tea colored, and that's from the leaching tannins as well as the iron.
My nieces and nephews from Philly used to come and swim in the Egg Lake. And they used to call it the iced tea lake.
A lot of people think it's dirty.
Yeah,
It was also pushed as being healing. That's why these creeks are over here. Serpentine. Yes, it was a healing place. People, I swim in that water, not this one, but like all the creeks and stuff my whole life. And I said, look, here I am.
yeah, I mean, there's something to it. It's most likely cleaner than some of the other water that you're gonna swim in, but
It's always cold.
but it does have those different nutrients. So if you are maybe iron deficient or something like that, and you're swimming in iron-rich water, it makes sense.
Probably swallowed something too while you were swimming.
Yeah. Yeah, so wetlands. So this is another one that is big when it comes to development. If there's wetlands in the area, there are certain buffer areas that you have to allow. Or you have to apply for waivers of strict compliance or different variances, or it's really they make it hard to develop where it's detrimental to wetlands. It's not impossible, but the Pinelands Commission and the Comprehensive Management Plan intentionally makes it difficult because this is why the Pinelands is protected. These are the most biodiverse areas of the Pinelands where you're finding water, and you find water all over the Pinelands. All right, so fire, and this is why the forests are generally pitch pine forests, because fire is a natural part of the ecosystem. The plants have adapted, or some plants have adapted, to thrive in that sort of environment. So if you ever see a fully grown pine cone on the ground and it's completely closed, that's a type of pine cone that evolved to come off the pine tree, and it's waiting for fire to open it up. So there we'll have regular pine cones that are opened up, but there's also those other pine cones that will stay closed until fire actually comes along, and that's when it will open to basically replenish the forest. So when the fire comes through and it burns off some of the oaks or some of the maples that have kind of made their way into that area, those pine trees will take back over. And then the pine trees are also able to microcormic growth, I believe is what it's called. So if you ever see a pine tree and there's all these little sprouts coming out of the trunk itself, that's because there's probably fire at some point, and that's a way for it to come back and heal itself and get more sun. And it's also, you know, if anybody's ever read the book 1491, it talks about sort of a lot more information and evidence coming out for how this area was maintained by native people before European colonists and how fire was a natural part of that. So there's evidence going back hundreds of them, you know, up to thousands of years that suggests that fire was a natural part of the system, but it was also a human element as well, that people were using fire to maintain different areas of habitat. For, you know, deer populations, for the types of things that they wanted to grow in those areas and things like that. From our standpoint, from the human standpoint, it's important to keep fire in the system. So if a pinelands forest goes for, you know, 50 to 100 years and fire hasn't been there, then that's layers and layers of fuel on the ground. And then there's generally a dense undergrowth, but then it sort of connects with the canopy. So when you do a prescribed burn, you're trying to burn all the things at the low level. And you're trying to stop those connections from happening. So if it gets to the canopy and you're getting a lot more wind, that's how wildfires get out of control and they can spread across vast areas. If it gets to the canopy, that wind it can travel very far, if that makes sense. The fire can sort of jump from forest to forest. It can make its way across fire breaks and roads, because it's a lot windier up there. So they're trying to kind of disconnect those layers in the system. So you've got, you know, your underbrush and your leaves on the ground, which is a lot of fuel. But then you've got, if you let it go too long, you'll have all these different layers and it'll make its way all the way up to the canopy. So when they come through with prescribed burns, they're trying to kind of disconnect the canopy from that undergrowth. And it's cool kind of, so we had a couple of fires, they weren't prescribed burns, in the Blackburn Preserve in Evesham. And you see all these different things come up, things that have been in the seabed for a really long time. One area was completely covered in American fireweed. If anybody's ever seen that. It's sort of an interesting plant, but it probably won't be there next year or in 2 years because the undergrowth will start coming back. That inkberry holly, those rhododendron, the low bush and high bush blueberry will sort of take that area back over because they will come back. And that fireweed, those perennials that kind of come up immediately after those fires happen, so you probably won't see those again until there's another fire. So some people are studying these sorts of areas. I think I ever met Russell Julig from New Jersey Conservation Foundation. He was the one I was gonna mention. He has two Pinelands plant classes. He's got a beginner's class and an advanced class, which is more of like a self-study. You pick an area and you try and study that area and identify all the plants in a certain space. But he tries to get people to kind of do their self-studies in areas that have burned, and after they burn, to kind of see what's coming back up from the seed bank. You know, we haven't seen this certain plant in this area for X amount of years, but now that it burned, that plant came back. So it's pretty cool, the different research that's being done. All right, and so the vegetation, and we've got some here. So they're generally adapted to those low nutrients. They can survive in well draining soils, low nutrient soils. They can deal with the acidic water, the frequent fire as well. And then along the coast here, some plants are salt tolerant, not all. Obviously, the land white cedar is not a salt tolerant plant. So you might see if you do get more saltwater intrusion, you'll see certain areas being taken over by other things that can actually handle the salt. All right, we didn't really talk much about this, but the evergreen plants, the reason they keep their needles throughout the year is because it allows them to save energy. So let's say an oak sort of sends all of its energy in the fall and the winter down all into its roots. And so all of its energy is really in its roots, and then it sends it back up. And it takes a lot of energy to recreate all the, replace all those leaves in the spring and summer. Whereas evergreen trees don't have to do that. They don't have to reproduce that. They will shed some needles, obviously, and create new needles, but by not having that process where they're moving all that energy from one end of the tree to the next, it saves energy. All right, and so for some plants, which I have one, I think I have two here today. They've actually adapted to where they are carnivorous. So you have a couple of species of Drosera, which is the sundews. And you'll generally find those in wetter areas. And then you also have the pitcher plant, which I don't have a picture of, but that was in our bog garden. So the pitcher plant, that works by sort of capturing, by luring them in with, a sweet sort of nectar on a portion of its top. And then once that insect kind of sits there, it falls in, and then it gets digested that way. Whereas for the sundews, they're more of like a Venus flytrap, where they're putting out, a pheromone or a nectar. The insect comes in and it's sticky and it'll grab it. And then it'll sort of pull it in and digest it through its membrane. All right, and I kind of already got into this, but you can see the microcormic growth here, where it's popping out of the trunk to kind of regenerate itself and gather as much energy as possible so it can heal itself. And then with the pine cone, you'll see that some of those pine cones are meant to stay closed until fire opens them up. All right, and just kind of throwing out some stats. So there are a lot of herpetologists in the Pinelands for some reason. We do have some botanists. There are some entomologists doing, looking at insects and things like that. But there seems to be at the Pinelands Commission, and then even at the people from universities that are doing a lot of research. For some reason, it's very heavily herpetology. It's a lot of snakes, a lot of turtles. But I can't really do this for species that move a lot. I can't really throw a number up there and say there's X amount of birds, but we can kind of do that with snakes. So snakes, I can say there's about 20 different species of snake. There's one venomous one. Anybody know? Timber rattler. So that's the only venomous one that you'll find in the Pinelands. There's also a hognose, which is kind of cool because it'll play dead. If anybody's familiar with that. There's some cool pictures from our photo exhibit the past couple of years where they've shown the hognose on its back playing dead. So yeah, so there's not too many snakes out there that will hurt you. Generally, they want to stay away from you as much as possible. Some of the water snake will kind of put on a show if you're in its territory. It's a little bit territorial, but it's not a water moccasin. It's not poisonous. There's about 10 species of frogs and toads, but again, even with snakes, we estimate because these things move in and out. So if they're found in one edge of the pinelands, it might not be in pinelands at one point. But the Pinelands tree frog is one of our species that we like to throw out there because it looks pretty exotic for being in the Pinelands, but
They're little tiny ones. They're little tiny ones.
yeah, they're very, very small. Same thing with the gray tree frogs. You'll find them outside of gray tree frogs outside the Pinelands as well. But those are nice and small. I was with kids out at Estelle Manor and we were working on that rain garden out there at the nature center, and the kids found one. There's about 9 species of turtle, one of which was introduced. I think it's the red slider was an introduced species, so it doesn't necessarily belong here, but it's not necessarily doing damage or anything like that. It's not really displacing any other of the native species. And we'll talk about that more with the plants, about introduced versus invasive versus native versus cultivated. And who the heck knows how many species of fungi, because there are so many. There's a couple that actually goes out at least once a month out to Franklin Parker Preserve in Chatsworth. And they try and document everything they can, and they've been doing it for, I think, 30 or 40 years now. So they have probably the most comprehensive list of pineland fungi species. But there's probably species out there that haven't even been identified yet. Just because the fungi is so prevalent and there's so many different species and it's everywhere, that there aren't enough people studying these things to actually identify and describe all these things scientifically.
Aren't they edible?
These in particular,
Not that particular one, but.
I wouldn't point to any mushroom and tell somebody else that it's edible.
Yeah.
There are a lot that look very, very similar. Maybe lion's mane, it's very distinct, but I'm not even sure if you would find that in the pinelands. But that's got a very distinct look. Turkey beard is one that I would feel maybe comfortable. Those are probably the only two that I would feel comfortable saying, yeah, that you could eat that. Otherwise, even the ones that some people have said are edible, a lot of people will report and say that bothers their stomach and things like that. So it really depends. And I definitely don't consider myself a fungi expert to that point. If it looks like this though, then you're probably safe to not eat it. So a lot of I think this is an amanita. So if it looks sort of like this, a lot of those are toxic or poison. All right, and lots of birds. But like I said, I would never feel comfortable putting up a number of how many species of birds you would find in the Pineland because they move everywhere. And then you get weird things like a vagrant Siberian bird that came to Manchester 2 years ago now. It just showed up and it was on somebody's property and then all the birders converged. And the guy, apparently they made hot dogs for the people and everything like that, but the bird had no business being in New Jersey. But it somehow got blown off course or something like that. We call those like vagrants. They kind of just show up where nobody would expect them. But I want to show you a tool if people aren't familiar with eBird or Merlin. You can actually use the app and it'll help you identify by sound. But there's also a field guide in the app, so it'll show you what would be expected in your area. So if you're somebody that enjoys bird watching, and you're looking at a bird and you're like, I don't really know what that is. If you bring up the app, it'll look at your location and the time of year and it'll say, well, this is what we can expect. So that can be helpful and it can replace, walking around with a bunch of field guides. But you can also use it to identify with sound. So you hit record and it's picking up all the bird sound and it'll show you what it's hearing at that moment. And yeah, and if you want, you can hook it up to it's a Cornell app. So Cornell is the premier university collecting all this bird data, and they use people's observations. So there's a lot of citizen science involved. So Merlin is a cool tool and it can be fun, but you can also hook it up to the eBird database. And so your observations and your recordings, you can have it go towards citizen science and understanding bird migrations and biodiversity populations like that. And we'll get into that then. And more fungi. And more cut off my feathered dinosaurs. But more feathered dinosaurs. And more birds. And so just want to real quick, we'll kind of go through the food chain a little bit, since we're talking flora and fauna. So there are bears occasionally observed in the Pinelands. This one was from 2022 and it somehow made it to Barnegat. There was also when I was living in Kings Grant in Marlton, in 2017, there was a bear that was, in the Pinelands. I have seen a coyote in the Pinelands. There are possibly bobcats. I haven't seen any observations in any of the recent history. But people do think that they might still be out there. The problem is that a lot of these connections got cut off. So when I bring up a slide later and they'll show the lights of, from Philadelphia to New York and everything, there's sort of this slash. And you have Pinelands over here, next to the coast, and then you've got this big slash of light. And it sort of shows how that connection from the Pinelands to the Highlands is kind of cut off by development. So a lot of those things that probably would have moved back and forth at one point in time, depending on the season, they don't really necessarily do that anymore. And we have red foxes, gray foxes.
We did have bears in Egg Harbor.
Okay.
On our rec fields, maybe about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And I heard that the bear population is up this year,
Mhm.
so make sure you put your trash away
Yeah.
properly. You never know what's gonna
I'm
come
just
out of the
feeding-
woods.
I just feed them, tell them to come back. My daughter-in-law opens and closes the Lower Bank Bridge, and she swears that she sees people bringing animals like that across the bridge.
Capturing them.
That's interesting. And then here are some of the other mammals. Who wants to take a guess about the two on here that would, actually, I think I have a video first. Yeah, there we go. All right, so this was just outside of the Pinelands. I was doing some water sampling in Lumberton, right down the street from our headquarters, and I thought I saw a beaver or a fish down the way, so I took out my camera and it was three river otter.
Wow.
So that generally you don't see them a lot. I was kind of in the just chance position. This was right off of like Landing Street in a developed area. And I kind of walked down the bridge to collect a water sample, and they just swam right by. Generally you're probably not gonna see them, but if you ever see scat and there's a lot of fish scales in it, that's most likely you're seeing evidence of a river otter. It's very, very distinct. You'll see kind of like it's like flaky. And it doesn't look like anything else. But who wants to take a guess about the two things on this slide that have the most impact on Pineland ecosystems or ecosystems in general? I heard one.
The beaver, right?
Beaver, and there's one more.
The raccoon.
I don't know. Deer.
Yeah, so the-
Eat a lot of stuff.
So the beaver doesn't necessarily have it in our terms, yes, sometimes they're a nuisance and they create problems for us. But if we're looking at just the wildlife and the natural system, beavers are amazing creatures, the engineers, they create habitat for so many different things, waterfowl, fish, they sort of open things up for people. But they also create a disturbance that creates a succession. So beavers won't stay in one pond for all that long. So they build a dam, they create sort of this a pond area, and generally will kill the trees in that area because they can't handle all of that moisture. Their roots can't be flooded. So eventually those trees will turn into bird habitat because they're dead trees. Woodpeckers will come in. There'll be insects there to eat. The woodpeckers will drill holes, which other animals will use for habitat. Eventually, those trees will fall, and it'll be a kind of an open pond, and it'll be like that for maybe a generation or two. The beaver will continue using it, but after so much sediment and leaf deposits and things like that, the pond will almost get eutrophic, where there's too much vegetation building back up. There's too many nutrients in that pond, so the beaver will move on, find a different place. that pond will then slowly become a meadow, that meadow will slowly become a forest, so. So the beavers are amazing creatures and they create a disturbance that helps other creatures thrive. Yes, you know, some things like those trees that were there originally aren't doing so well anymore, but it sort of creates this unique system. But the other one, the deer, since we've sort of removed the top predators from the pinelands, the deer are a significant problem, not just for the pinelands, but in general throughout New Jersey. Since there are a lot of areas that where deer aren't managed, there's overpopulation. So when I'm planting a lot of native plants, and then I have Bradford pears or foreign honeysuckles or crepe myrtles, and the deer has a choice between something they've never eaten in their life before. Let's think of it as like really, really spicy Indian food, or I've got a pork roll, sandwich. If you're from Jersey, you're picking that pork roll sandwich. And so the deer overgraze and they eat all those native things. And then what we're left with these foreign species that were introduced, and now we can consider them invasive because they're kind of taking up that space that would have been filled by oak saplings or maple saplings or our native shrubs and things like this. So those are the two on here that can really remake a landscape.
I got a good beaver story. I used to walk for exercise and Peace Pilgrim Park was right back here. And I was walking down, I think it's Camp Street, and city workers were over there cutting up a huge willow tree. And I freaked out. I was like, what are you doing cutting that willow tree down? He said, we didn't cut it down, the beavers did. And I looked real close and you could actually see the bite marks. They came up out of the water, ate it, and that tree was, it was a riot. It was so funny to see. I never saw anything like that before. But,
Are you saying that we shouldn't be growing crepe myrtle?
yes, they're invasive, or they're emerging
Well, so-
invasives.
Well, so crepe myrtle,
That's 5 of them in my.
I kind of categorize them as, so Bradford pear is like a disease.
You don't have.
I would call it sort of cancer because it was supposed to be sterile. And it's not sterile. It sort of pollinates with other pear species that are already here. So you'll see somebody with, 2 or 3 Bradford pears in their property. And then you'll see a vacant lot or a wooded lot or a forest across the street, and you'll see them all in the tree line. Because they're getting dispersed. Crepe myrtle is more like ecological plastic for New Jersey. It provides some, pollen, some, bees might get a little pollen from it. Birds might use it to build a nest because it's there. But it's really not providing any sort of ecological benefit. So I describe it as sort of that ecological plastic, or it's a pretty tree.
Neutral.
It's it's neutral. It's a pretty tree, but it's not providing any real benefits but it's also not doing anything that's necessarily negative. So I was gonna, when we get into the plans, we can get more into, invasive versus cultivated and stuff like that. But yeah, I just got into that because of the deer, and the deer sort of exacerbate that. So if the deer has a choice between that Bradford pear and the tree line, or a young oak sapling, it's going after that sapling, and if that oak sapling's not gonna make it, and so a couple more Bradford pears are gonna pop up next to it. All right, and the base of the food chain. So this is sort of where other than the plants, I think that there's sort of a gap in what information is being put out and what sort of research is being done in the pinelands. There's not a whole lot as far as, what insects are present in the pineland. I can look at some of these field guides and they're more for like a general region. Here's your region. This is probably what you can expect to find as far as butterflies, moths, dragonflies and things like that. But these are the other things that make up the base of the food chain. We have our plants, obviously, which are give life on this earth. But then we've got these really, really cool insects that, birds rely on, caterpillar more than anything when they're breeding and nesting. And that's Doug Calamy is big on talking about that, about exactly how many caterpillars a day, a Carolina chickadee chick needs to make it through. And I think it's a couple hundred a day for each Carolina chickadee chick. So if I plant a Bradford pear or a crepe myrtle and there's no caterpillars that use that as a host, or I can plant an oak that can play host to 300 to 400 different types of caterpillar species. And, a full grown oak, you're talking about, yes, people kind of cringe when you say insect, but these are beneficial insects that are also bringing now birds in. So you bring the insects in, you bring the birds in, and it works together. But yeah, like I said, there's a lot of herpetologists. It seems like in the Pinelands, not a whole lot of entomologists, at least that I've run into. If you're ever interested in doing a moth night, Amory Woods is sort of the local naturalist that will go out and set up a moth sheet. So she basically just puts up like a screen or a sheet where they can land on something where they can grip. And then you set up a really bright light, either mercury halide or sodium. I forget the two, but the really bright light that they don't really sell everywhere anymore. Or you can do a black light as well, because they see in different spectrum than we do. So you're trying to attract them to the sheet, and you can see just the vast array of species. And so since I think pine trees are host to like at least 100. Host plant for at least like 100 different moths and butterflies. Oaks are 300 to 400 different types of moth and butterfly. We'll use it as their host. So you bring those in, you bring the birds in. I'm a birder, so I like that. The overview of done with the drone. We get a lot of pictures from our we do a photo exhibit every year, so we got a lot of cool pictures that we can use.
You were trying, got a new buzz so far. It's our second year doing the photo. Of trees particularly.
Oh, okay. So here's the one I wanted to show you. So this is where the Pinelands is at night. So you can see the sort of unbroken string of bright light from New York to Philly to Baltimore, DC, and all the way up. And you see this dark spot here in New Jersey, which is the Pinelands. And then you sort of see this line that kind of prohibits that movement from the highlands to the Pinelands, where you might see more of those bears and bobcats move back and forth. And we kind of already talked about this. And I won't really get into this. I think I'm pretty much done with the slides for now. I wanted to get you, I guess, yeah, this is the last one I'll stop on. So these are some of our political lines that we have drawn as humans. And nature doesn't really abide by any of these. Water also doesn't abide by any of these. So if I brought up a watershed map, it would cross, each watershed would cross multiple counties, multiple townships, and multiple, sort of some of them multiple geographic regions. And nature doesn't abide by any of this. So when it comes to environmental work, a lot of times we're looking to try and take a more regional approach than a lot of municipalities are generally looking at. So Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan and Pinelands Commission a lot of times scares people and developers, and people build up a lot of animosity. But without that, one town might completely plow their forest down, and another town might actually appreciate the Pinelands for what it is and leave it. But then you get all these different fragments, and the Pinelands would look completely different. So that's not really, I guess that's my pitch for the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan. obviously, we have disagreements with the Pinelands Commission, pretty often. But we do have a unique relationship where we support them in certain things and, you know, we tell them they're doing a bad job in other ways, but it's always a conversation. It's always a conversation, but it always centers around, this is a special place. It has a lot of special features. It's an amazing place for humans to visit and enjoy. And that's what it's all about, is the Pinelands and the Pine Barrens.
I remember I moved to this area in 1978. And that's when they were discussing coming up with the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan. And I used to read the press of Atlantic City, and I was like fascinated because I'm from the city and we didn't have trees or any kind of nature around us at all. Everything was concrete. And I thought this is great. This is absolutely great that they're doing this. And everybody was looking at me like, no, we don't want that. But with the onset of the casino industry, they were looking at this area because they knew it would develop and they would have thousands and thousands of jobs. And these people would need housing and all, and that's when they were bringing in the water lines and the sewer lines. And they were concentrating most of the development around those sewer lines. So it was Galloway, Hamilton, and Egg Harbor Township. They got the sewer lines and all the development, and here Egg Harbor City was kind of left out of the mix there. And they got all the development and we got nothing. So, and that we're still in that same pattern here in Egg Harbor City. You know, we have the downtown area which can be developed, but you go past Deer Street, Moss Mill Road, very few areas there can be developed except for the neighborhoods of Cedar Creek. So it is frustrating as a politician and a government official, because we need development to stay new, stay advanced, and create a stable tax base. But you also understand all this stuff too, and it's like, yeah, we gotta be smart about what we do, because that's gonna last longer than the concrete. And my opinion, nature will be here forever.
And we need it.
The
We need it
concrete's just
to make,
deteriorate.
to keep things peaceful and whatever. I grew up not very far from this spot right here, and I live right down the street here, but we were in the Pinelands all the time. All the time. We used to pick, and I was happy to hear you say the word huckleberries. There was no such thing as blueberries. We'd pick wild huckleberries, the big bushes, the low bushes, and bake with them and all kinds of things. And then cranberries, the wild cranberries we picked and everything. My cousin and her husband owned a cranberry bog, which they had as a commercial bog in Weekstown for years. That was all part of our lives here. And like I said, my mother knew where all the orchids were, all those things. We were out there all the time. So Pinelands is a big part of my life and who I am. And I would hate to see it disappear. And I'm an animal lover, so I like all the wild animals. Raccoons come to my back door at night and say to the cats, "Hi, how are you? I'm glad you're sharing something with me." They just talk to each other. My yard's all fenced, so the cats can't get out, and the raccoons come across the fence.
Yeah, and so, the other approach to finding that balance is something like this. And you guys are trying to get Doug Conley out here, and he's sort of the leading voice for doing native plants and native things on your property. The Pinelands Commission and the Native Plant Society put this together, sort of sort of a guide or a template to how you can incorporate native things and sort of habitat into your property. We might not need the comprehensive management plan if we weren't talking about sort of these let-it-town models where you plow everything down, you build the houses, you pop up a couple of Bradford pears and whatever's cheapest at the local landscaping or nursery store, plop those in. If we weren't using that model, maybe we wouldn't even need the comprehensive management plan. If we were just kind of carving out a little space to build a single family home, and we kept a lot of that natural landscape, we might not need it at all. But since the model is come through cut everything down, grade everything, change that whole landscape, build a, retention pond or retention, area. Since that's the model that is happening, the comprehensive management plan will definitely help to protect, Pinelands into the future. But, for those that do enjoy the Pinelands and that want sort of that native piece in their property, I wanted to kind of just throw some tools out there. Like I said, this is one from the Pinelands Commission. I think they, like I said, worked with the Native Plant Society about, different ways to keep your home safe. You don't want pitch pines right up against your house, obviously, but ways that you can, maintain sort of a native landscape in portions of your property or all of your property, depending on what your motivations are. I think Doug Talmy says if you can keep, 70% of your landscaping plants native, then you're doing well. Then you're contributing or sort of restoring that native landscape. So another one, so there's this one from the Pines Commission. It just shows you some basics. Why native plants are better as far as water. So most of them are adapted for this environment to be planted in this environment, whereas some of the stuff that you might get at a nursery that's from Asia or Europe or something like that, it's not necessarily adapted for here. So the roots are going to go deeper on native plants. They're generally going to be better suited for the water cycles for what our temperate climate is providing as far as water, and what the type of soil is as well. And then I'm sure some of you might be familiar with Jersey Friendly Yards. So this is a great one.
That's a good one.
So if you're looking, the one that I use the most is just the plant database. So you can look up individual plants, but let's say I wanted an alternative for great. Is that A or E? All right, let's see. Yeah, so if I look up a Bradford or calorie pear, it'll basically tell you that it's invasive, but then it'll also tell you, here's some things that you might be able to plant that are native that are sort of equivalent alternatives. But it gives you some great information. So I don't want to bring that one up because I brought that one. Open quiz people. Let's go with. All right, so I'm just gonna bring up an oak. Just a general oak real quick. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of blackjack oak in the Pinelands. So this can tell you, what sort of condition to plant it in, when it'll be in bloom, what sort of moisture, how much sun it needs. It gives you all that information you kind of need to determine where on your property you want to plant it. But then a lot of these, and this one, because oaks have so many, but a lot of times they'll tell you if they're a host plant for a specific type of moth or caterpillar or butterfly or something like that. It'll tell you what that relationship is. It'll say it's a host plant for the monarch or milkweed or something like that. So that's a great resource. And then so the last thing I want to show everyone today is sort of those tools, and I can do that if people want to come up and look at the plants. I brought my pocket. I have another one too. I'm doing kind of take it. Do you have any pockets? I'll show you. So I got a couple things here with me.
Could you
Take-
like turn your TV off. I mean,
Okay.
computer off if you finish it.
You want me to?
Yeah, because
Sign
then
out.
you could see, there for the other end, but.
All right, so anybody want to take a guess at that guy? Kind of young.
Yeah, it's tiny.
Anybody want to take a guess at?
Did it burn? Working?
No, this is the Drosera intermedia, spoon or
Right on the tip of his tongue.
sorry, it's a sundew.
Sunday.
This, anybody want to take it out?
That's like a fern.
It's beautiful, whatever it is. This is another sundew. This is the threadleaf sundew. Drosera filiformis. So all these little hairs. So it's still, both of these are still kind of young. You'll see these kind of in full bloom later in the summer. But these little hairs, I don't know if you're closer look at either one of these, but those little hairs are what get the sticky, like sap that the insects will smell. They'll come in, they'll land on it. And
They like marshiness, right?
Yes, yeah,
They
so
like
we-
big words.
these you'll usually find, some of the best places I find them, well, Axion has a bunch around the lake. But that lake is man-made, so around a lot of man-made stuff like that, or if you're on the Basta or the Mullica along the banks. But along Old Cranberry Bog, they tend to find, so here's our fern.
I love that.
Anybody wanna take a guess at which one that is? So in the summer, or later in the summer, you'll see sort of this big, a hairy brown sort of stalk. That's the cinnamon fern. And so ferns reproduce, and it might still be too early to kind of see without a microscope, but ferns reproduce with spores. So underneath of the fern, you see these little sort of dots, and that's where the spores come out.
I thought they were bugs.
Yeah, no, they're all spores, little black things.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where the spores will generally come out of from the different types of ferns. But these are considered, I think they're considered non-vascular plants. So even some of the botanists, if it doesn't have a flower, like well, like this here or this here, they might shy away from it. So they'll focus in on, flowering plants, or, someone will be an expert in non-vascular ferns. The ferns are really interesting because they're prehistoric. They're some of the oldest plants on the planet, so they're really cool. Anyone want to take a guess?
Cranberry.
Yep. So this is cranberry. It's still early. This is one of the ones that we were trying to force for the flower show. I learned a lot about trying to get plants to flower, how to see them. But we weren't successful with everything. This one was purchased. This one I pulled out of one of our preserves, just a little piece because it had the moss, but then a couple of weeks ago, this was like maroon, so it added some nice color to our rock garden. But there's lots of different types of moss, and that moss would be considered sort of a non-vascular plant as well. It doesn't flower, it reproduces differently. Moss is often a pioneer species, so if there's some sort of disturbance, moss and lichen and things like that will sort of be the first thing that comes back and sort of tries to take over that area again. But yeah, so this is cranberry, and when you see it out in the wild, you'll probably see it sort of mixed in a lot like this. In the preserve I pulled this out, and there's also club moss, which sort of looks like it looks like a lighter green like this, but it crawls on the ground. It kind of shoots out and laying on the ground and sort of slivers, which is kind of cool. Anybody know what this one
It's beautiful. There's little bell flowers.
is? Bearberry? Yeah, yeah, so this is bearberry. You'll see this in a lot of drier air, so this is like upland undergrowth. It's a woody, considered a subshrub. So it'll creep around the ground, but if it needs sun and something else is blocking it out, it'll kind of throw up, shoots to try and get some more sun. But generally they'll kind of be a ground spreader.
Does that stay green in the winter time?
Yeah, it does.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, it looks just like.
Wildlife likes the berry that it puts out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The birds love it, all wildlife.
Can
Alright.
you grow those like I've got an apple, that apple area?
Yeah, I've just looked that
Where
up.
did you purchase those? I mean, you don't dig them out of the woods.
no, so.
That seems.
So pretty much all of these are commercially available. Like I said, this one was pulled out of a preserve. All of these other ones were purchased. I got this in Gino yesterday, which is in PA, but you can get this at local places. I just happened to go out there because they have everything I needed for the Estelle Manor rain garden. But this is like a dry upland species, so if you're planting it, maybe partial sun, at most. It likes sort of being in that under area, drier. But yeah, this is a great plant.
It's very cool.
I like using it. So when we do the rain garden, we generally have like a berm around it, to where it's gonna be a lot drier than it is gonna be in the area that we dug out. So I like using it sort of all along to fill in that outer edge.
And how long does it flower?
So this should be, let's see, the one I forced for the bog garden, probably a couple weeks. No, it'll be in flower.
I wanted to put this in an area in our yard, and I've been calling all around, and everyone's telling me it could be 2 weeks before it's available for sale.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so, I mean, some of the stuff, even yesterday when I went and picked up a bunch of stuff for the project, they were like. Because I have other orders, and they were like, might not be ready in time, because we're doing our native plant sale April 25th and 26th. And even that they're saying for certain things, they might not know if it made it through the winter or if it's gonna come, pop out, for mostly perennials. And for the bearberry, unless it's like a plug or they're just growing it from seed, then they should have something that's evergreen.
I was told that it won't be available for 2 weeks.
Maybe they won't get it, maybe they won't
Right,
get it.
if
I
Yeah.
called a place up a little north that does,
On 206.
only does retail, and they wouldn't sell it to me because they only do retail.
Oh,
Wholesale, I mean,
Pinelands Nursery?
yeah.
Yeah.
And wholesale, but there was a place down in Ocean View that says they'll have it in a couple of weeks.
Is that there's Summer Sweet? I know the ones that are.
Summer
those-
Sweets and Maze Landing.
Yeah,
Right.
that one's one, I haven't used it yet, but I've been meaning to, because they're one of the all native nurseries. Pinelands Nursery is all native, but they're wholesale.
Mhm.
They do a Pinelands Direct.
You can do it online, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've gotten plants ordered for myself personally. I've gotten stuff from Toad Shade because they'll ship to you. They're up, I think Stockton or somewhere up in that area or Frenchtown. But they'll ship it to you, and they do a really good job of getting it to you quickly.
what's the name of that place?
Toad Shade Wildflower Farm.
Toad
Toad Shade,
Shade.
like toad, like frog.
Okay, Toad
Oh,
Shade,
Toad
Shade,
Yeah.
Toad, okay.
You have that at your sale, the headquarters?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where's your native?
So that's at our headquarters in Southampton.
We've been there before.
Yeah, so we're having a
Up
good,
near, sort of like near
206.
Pemberton,
Yeah.
up that way,
Yeah.
off of 206. I don't know.
When's the date of your sale?
the 25th and 26th.
I know where it is.
It's on Arbor Day, and which is why you can't come to our Arbor Day celebration, and the day after. So go on Saturday.
Yeah, go on
Come
Saturday.
to us on,
So
Or
Friday,
Friday.
is meant if you're a PPA member, which is like, I think it's $30 or $35. And that's one of the perks is you get to come to the plant sale early, and it's Saturday for everybody. But we'll have that, I ordered a lot of species. this year.
Mhm.
So it's gonna be a good sale. Anybody know this one?
Miniature blueberry?
Yes, this is a low bush blueberry. Some of the flowers, I think it's because
Yeah,
I think- I think-
Certainly, I'm gonna get.
I think because it's been kind of getting warm and then cold again, some of these flowers aren't, popping like they might normally, but yeah.
A
this
lot of
is-
flowers on it though.
Yeah, so that'll all turn into, if they're pollinated, it'll all turn into.
Huckleberries.
Huckleberries, blueberries, okay, and then.
They record. I'm
I
sorry.
have those in prickly pear.
Yeah, so prickly pear, so I kind of wanted to show the sort of range of
Yeah.
things, so we've got, the carnivorous plants, we've got the fruit producing plants, and then we've got cool stuff like this that you find in the uplands and the undergrowth.
That's prickly. I
And
had
then-
them in my yard when we bought our house. I got rid of them because they
Yeah.
get hurt like it's definitely.
Yeah, so I think you can get them without
The pricklies.
the needles, but the flower. The
Yeah.
flowers, man.
They're beautiful.
Beautiful, they are
I
beautiful.
don't have those spikes on them.
Yeah. Yeah, just the bright yellow flowers.
Yeah,
It's
they are
beautiful,
beautiful. Sure.
Low blueberry needs a lot of sun, or is it, can it tolerate shade?
You just have to be out there.
So low bush, I mean, generally you could probably take partial sun because it's growing in more undergrowth, so it would be naturally under things. High bush tends to do better in full sun.
Low bush blueberry.
Yeah, so.
I just have this big section I want to do native again,
Is
and
that what these?
that's why I wanted the bearberry.
That's not the same.
So I wanted to show you everyone real quick, so if we're looking at plants, and like critters and insects and things like that, there's two apps, that are connected. One is called Seek, which I'll bring up first, because that one's kind of cool. So this one was designed for kids, because you're not necessarily automatically adding to a database where people can comment on your picture or observation. And there's challenges and cool things like that. So I like to show kids this one, but I also like using it because I can bring up my camera and I can point it at what I'm looking at. And it'll try and identify it right on the screen.
Wow, that's cool.
So,
What's that called, that app?
so this one's called Seek.
Seek.
It got there.
Yeah.
But it'll go through and it's trying to make it through family, genus, class, and all that to get to species. And so, there we go. So right as you have the screen up, I could be looking at an insect and pointing my camera at it, and it'll try and identify that insect. Seek. And then once you take the picture, it'll give you more information, that you can bring up the Wikipedia page, but I can also post the iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is this international database for biological diversity. There's 250 million some observations that people have uploaded to iNaturalist. And it's being used for research, it's being used for conservation, being used for different studies and things like that. Pollinators being one of the big ones. So there was a report that just came out. It was a journal article in Science about the decline in butterfly species. And they were pulling from all of these citizen science databases and groups to basically put that study or that article together to show that these pollinators are in decline. But yeah, so I don't want to edit because this is you generally don't do like cultivated plants and stuff like that. This is more for wildlife if you're out in the forest and stuff. But if I wanted to, I could hit post iNaturalist. As long as I have an account in the iNaturalist, it'll go in there, and then people, if it's a misidentification, or maybe I only get to the genus. Once it's in the database, other experts and people can weigh in and say, I think it's this, or based on, your picture, we can't necessarily identify it down to the species level. Like a lot of insects, they look so similar, you almost need to do DNA. So you might get that, but people can kind of help you identify. But it's also a way to learn out there. So if you're not familiar with some of the plants, but you want to know what it is, you can use these apps. So this one's Seek, and like I said, that one's cool because it's trying to identify while you have your camera up. So it's trying
Really
to
cool.
go through that. So the database one is called iNaturalist. And so this is where all of your observations are uploaded, and all these little bubbles here are showing that somebody either confirmed my identification, made a comment, suggested it being something else. So there's naturalists and scientists and things like that that are collating all these things and either using it for research or they're just trying to help people out and identify things and understand local biodiversity. So you can explore, so I can see if anybody is making observations in this area. It might take a second to load. But yeah, so somebody is using it and identifying different things in this area. So you can pull that up
That's really cool.
and you can click on them and see what they're seeing.
Oh my God.
So somebody saw pickerel weed right down the street. So you can bring that up and see what other people are putting in there. Yeah, so you can see all that. And then if you want to observe, if you want to upload an observation on here, so you hit observe the camera here. And then you would do the same thing. So you could either upload a photo that you've already taken, or you can bring the camera up. The only difference is it's not going to try and identify right now. So I'll take the picture first. And then I'll hit use photo.
Hmm.
And then it'll say, what did you see? So you can put that in manually, or the artificial intelligence is going to try and help you.
Hmm.
So it'll bring up a list of what it thinks it might be. So the first one that came up is bearberry. So at bearberry, it'll have the, if your location settings are turned on, which mine are, you can make it private if you don't want to share that. But I can select if it's captive or cultivated as well for this. We can put in any notes, but then I can hit share, and that goes into that biodiversity that's contributing to citizen science. Yeah, so I want to show you those because, like I said, they can be tools to learn out there. You can leave all this at home. At least if you can get close enough, because I've only gotten close enough to a couple of those. Birds are tough. These are easier. Moths are easier if you use a nice bright light. For like flowers and things that don't move, you sit there, you take a picture, try and figure out what you're seeing, and then it also connects you to those resources to learn more about whatever it is.
How big do these get?
6 to 12 inches.
Yeah.
So they say
Oh, high, I
relatively
mean.
small.
Yeah,
That's
as far as-
relatively small.
this is probably around as high as you might see it.
Oh, okay.
Unless it's in a forest and it's really starving for sunlight, then it might try and, go higher, but generally it's a spreader. So it'll kind of cover it'll send these out and it'll kind of cover the ground in different directions.
No, I don't like
The bees love that, the birds love it, it hosts to a lot of butterflies. Different butterflies.
Oh,
It's a
I
nice,
love it.
yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, I really like this one.
I think it was $149 for 32.
that's from
Little plants.
Pinelands place.
I don't know what an
Where
ocean.
did you buy that again?
So this one I got at Geno's, which is in Pennsylvania. But you can get this at Pinelands Nursery or Pinelands Direct once they, have it in. I'm more on the other side, the Delaware side.
There was nothing around here other than Ocean View and then on 206 of Pinelands, and then there was one little bit north where we made a lot of calls about that
A
plant.
lot of calls.
Yeah, and then the only other one I would suggest that, like I said, I haven't tried it yet, but I know it's all native. Is the meadow sweet or
Summer sweet.
Summer
summer
Okay.
sweet?
Yeah, we've been there.
They came to our, we had them here once. I think when we were in Lincoln Park, they came with some native plants. During Mays Landing somewhere. I've never been out to their.
Right on 40.
location, but
As you're leaving Mays Landing.
Yeah, I can always email you the ones that I use.
Mhm.
And just let you know that I tend to use a lot of the wholesale media accounts.
Right.
So it makes it a little bit easier, but Geno's is retail and wholesale. So if you're planning on making a trip out to like Hopewell or something like that, then, you know, you can always stop out there. It's a nice area.
Mhm.
And then I guess the last thing I can show you is, along with Jersey Friendly Yards, it does it. This book is kind of cool because it shows you different native species. This is a Doug Tallamy book, but it shows you sort of the ecological functions of some of the plants. And there's other resources online that show these, and they let you know which ones are keystone species. So the ones that provide the most ecological bang for your buck. If you're planting perennials, asters and goldenrods are two of the best that provide, you know, a lot of ecological value. If you're doing trees, oaks are probably the best, but maples are pretty high up there, and pines as well. Caterpillars, they host, or native trees host caterpillars. Caterpillars have found a way, even holly. I was surprised about that, because like holly's a tough leaf. But yeah, there are caterpillars that eat holly.
I had a lot of asters and they all died out. I don't know why.
Our whole
Um,
yard is native, except for one thing, I think it's a periwinkle. And ivy that we're trying to get.
Ripping out the ivy every chance I get.
Periwinkle,
English?
English.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
invasive.
I just moved from Marlton to Ocean County, to Pine Beach. And people, English ivy is just rampant.
Well,
People
people used to love it 50 years ago.
I didn't know. Someone gave me a piece of it. I put it in the yard 45 years ago. And now I'm just ripping it out every chance I get it.
Yeah, I just got the,
So invasive.
I got the native vine, trumpet honeysuckle.
We had some of that.
Hummingbird,
I love that.
yeah. So I have to get that in the ground this spring.
The non-native honeysuckle it's, even though it's non-native, it has a sentimental value from when I was a kid, that smell.
Oh, I love it.
Is that the vine or the shrub?
Fine.
Okay, the, Japanese honeysuckle.
I know it's not native.
So, some, the moths will eat that,
And the
caterpillars.
bees like it too.
I found, at our headquarters, I was walking around the meadow one day and I watched a, snowberry clearwing. Have you ever seen one of those? Those are interesting ones. They look kind of like a lobster with wings. But it laid its egg on that caterpillar, and so I took the little clipping and we took it home and watched it grow in a terrarium.
Neat. They did that with a caterpillar.
Yeah,
Oh, God, I love that.
fuzzy.
Yeah, so here's the snowberry clearwing, so they like,
Yeah, we
they
have
like the
that.
wild bergamot, they like the honeysuckle.
Oh,
Yeah, we see them a lot in the yard.
Those are pretty cool,
They
I
are,
just think they're a hummingbird at
the
first.
way they hover.
yeah.
They look like a hummingbird flying
And the
around.
hummingbirds do any day now.
Yeah.
They said they're trying to get my feeders out.
Yeah, we got the purple martin made it back to
Oh, yeah.
our farm.
Yeah, good. I've been trying to show you.
We can't get that, we can go to the sale.
It was.
At the end of the month.
They went to find out what they would say.
I think you said the 25th.
I think it's the.
Here's some,
Maybe.
That's not.
Yeah, that looks like some of the ones that.
it's the same day as this.
Oh, it's the
And
same
again,
day.
this looks like.
That's where people were at members.
This just moves and.
Friday, it's the member, and then the next day.
Right, exactly.
And then I'm like, so my cats go in and out.
I actually saw, so anyway,
That's where we went before.
has anybody heard of Mount Cuba before?
That's here.
Mount Cuba?
No. You
So
can't have
they
one.
take
Yeah.
plants that
Oh, you mean
nurseries
last
or
week,
something,
last year?
and they do studies on, you know, how do they support pollinators, you know, how well do they do in different conditions, things like that.
Yeah.
But
That's
they
what I
did,
wanted.
they did Carex pennsylvanica, which is a native shrub,
He said he
or
never
sedge,
told something.
and they mowed it like lawn. And so you'll find Pennsylvania,
Yeah, I can't remember.
this sedge, in the Pinelands. But they mowed it like lawn,
Still
to see
something.
if it could be
Something to,
used as like
That was
a
it.
lawn alternative.
yeah, but he said we can order it.
Seemed to do pretty well.
Yeah, well, I'm
Maybe
trying
we
to get
can-
my whole.
Maybe at some point we can work on it.
I'm not good at that stuff.
Yeah.
What is it, spotted lantern fly crush cards? Would they have instructions if you want to take some?
I think we might have some.
And then there's some vegetable plant seeds and some asters and cities, they're usually. That's right. And this brochure has all the 17 species of trees in Lincoln Park. Some of them are invasive. Some of them are native, so if you're interested in our brochures, one is on our organization, Sustainable EHC, and the other one is about trees in Egg Harbor City. And this is our flyer for the Spring Environmental Series. We have several other events coming up. Next one's Arbor Day on the 25th, when he's having his plant sale. And
And that's also the League of Municipalities night.
I'm not going.
I know you're not.
be there.
I'm going to, I missed the
I
last
already
meeting.
responded.
Okay.
And some of the other things we have going on are, then it's the community cleanup day. If anybody wants to help us clean up, we could do East Pilgrim Park, or we could go out to Hay Road. It's up to people here what they want to do. Then we're having a rain barrel workshop. Steve's going to be presenting that. We're going to do that at the Lake Pavilion on a Saturday morning, and he'll bring some, how many, like a dozen or 15 rain barrels. I'll let you know how many registrations
I
we
would get
get.
64.
Huh?
I ordered
You
64,
ordered
but
64.
this is also for some other towns.
But they're already put together, right?
So all the fittings already done, the screening's already done at the top, so I'll show people the 2 different ways that they can install it out. Either cutting their downspout and directing it into the top, or we're gonna have kits where you can just drill a hole in your downspout, a pipe up that goes into the barrel, and then there's a plug that you put in the winter, to winterize it.
And then we're gonna do a mountain laurel walk at the nature trail on the Saturday, the 24th at 10 a.m. And if her milkweed is popping and she can get it out, we'll plant some along that walkway there. And then we're gonna do a potty party at the end of the month of May. And we'll do that at Peace Pilgrim Park right next door. And what we'll do is you bring your pot and we'll provide the dirt and the soil and the plants. And you can do it. And there's also some magnets. For all those people confused about recycling, we have refrigerator magnets. That's really could be recycled. Please take that for one refrigerator.
Yeah, I always wonder about
City,
city.
and that's
Because
a place
there are
to
things
start.
that I thought were not recyclable that now are accepted, because a while some of that stuff wasn't accepted now. But it says like, because we have a drawer that has tubs in it, and then everything's split, and it says, don't put your stuff in a plastic bag.
No,
Yeah, so I think,
that's not recyclable.
So Gary has to take it out of the bag and dump it in the containers.
Yeah.
so you go to.
I'm gonna scoot too.
You-
St. John's has a
Thanks so
basket
much,
of bus and I
Steve.
everybody's invited to. Baskets.
You know,
And I did 14 seconds later, I gotta get food. I didn't know what. Who?
The people that signed up.
Oh, that's weird.
Join that group and run it some more.
Oh,
New Jersey.
are the red